just so we have this recorded for folks down the road. Hi, my name is Andres Esparza, and I am the Grassroots Engagement Director here at the Conservation Lands Foundation. And we at CLF are really excited to have you joining us for this webinar. Apologies if I sound stuffy. I came down with a cold yesterday afternoon. I do not have COVID. I got tested already, but I am going to be a little bit stuffy and nasally. Thank you so much for joining us at this webinar for folks who made time to attend or will be watching this over the next couple of weeks. We're really excited to be closing out this year with one more webinar. And this is less of a presentation-based webinar and more of a tool that we are formally sharing with the entire network and the conservation community in the hopes that we can provide a tool that will help drive all of our work forward. As a conservation community, there are always so many things that we constantly want to be thinking about and who we include in campaigns, how we go about the work, and what we choose to value. And kind of line over all of that right now is quite possibly the biggest existential threat, which is climate change. This is something that we talk about a lot in the conservation community, but because we often don't talk about it in simple everyday language, or because it often can seem very abstract, it's been hard to quantify and show either numerically or in graphs or in pictures how vitally important the landscapes that we get to protect are to a climate safe future. Of the work that we get to do all across the country and even world is leading to a better world because it's addressing larger climate change issues. As this administration and as our conservation community starts to work towards 30 by 30 goals, protecting 30% of the land mass by the year 2030, we're going to need to be using tools that can build our case for protecting these landscapes. Build tools that show visually what we're trying to protect and why the landscapes we're looking to protect are so vitally important. So this webinar is going to be focused on a tool that Danielle Murray and others have developed along with a lot of other conservation partners that helps us look at the climate impact of land and how the land that we seek to protect is not just protecting the land and the animals and the cultural identity held in those places, but how the land being protected promotes a climate safe future. We're going to be going back and forth. This will be a slightly interactive webinar. Danielle will be explaining things and showing the tool live. If you have any questions, please look right below you at that bar, right around there. Should be a question and answer box. Please type in your questions as you think of them throughout this webinar, and we'll gladly get to them throughout the webinar. As well, take this opportunity as I'm introducing Danielle to click on that chat box and let us know where you're coming from. What's your name? What part of the country are you coming from? And who are you representing? We'd love to see who's on the calls here and who we're reaching. As well, all of this recording and other materials that we present will be included in follow-up email, so look forward to that. For now, I'd love to introduce our host and panelist, Danielle Murray, our Senior Legal and Policy Director at the Conservation Lands Foundation, a small local celebrity here in Durango. And I would say the lead on this really, really innovative tool, and not just this tool, but the way that we go about our work from a legal perspective. So Danielle, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andres. I'm excited to present this tool to you today, and I really look forward to the discussion following. Again, my name is Danielle Murray. I'm the Senior Legal Policy Director here at the Conservation Lands Foundation, and we are just going to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen. And again, put your questions, your thoughts in that toolbox or that chat box, and when we're done the tutorial, we'll make sure that we answer all of them. So I'm starting here on what is our front landing page and just a little history about the tool. This concept started in March of 2019 during the Trump administration, really beginning of the pandemic, when we started to see reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the Campaign for Nature about the importance of preserving natural landscapes and mitigating climate change and biodiversity. So I started asking our friends, our national partners, do you have a tool? Do you have maps, data that show that interconnection? And the answer I got was no. And so we actually partnered with a couple of groups, and I'll show you down here. Some notable entities, the Campion Foundation. Neil Cornsey, former BLM director, was an original visionary of this project, along with Nada Culver at the Audubon Society. We also partnered with Conservation Science Partners. They are kind of the PhD specialists that really brought this kind of vision to life. So again, this is the front end website. It's really meant to help provide resources, background to show you how to use the tool. One great thing is to go to this user guide. Again, look and see kind of how this tool can be used, what you can click on and off. Case studies are also a great opportunity to go and look at different landscapes, and I'm going to walk you through some of them today and see, okay, if I care about a landscape, how can I toggle on and off some of these tools to show the values of a landscape. And then I'm going to start here a little with methodology too, and go over some of the values or data you're going to see in this tool. And it's going to be a little maybe confusing at first, but once you see the actual data layers, I think it'll help kind of put them in context. And so because there is no single kind of climate value or biodiversity value, we looked at a series of 6 values to determine value of climate and biodiversity. So total carbon was 1, climate resilience, climate stability, ecological intactness, species richness, and ecological connectivity. All of those data layers you can see in the Climate Atlas. We then created 3 models based on those 6 data layers. One takes all 6 data layers and puts them into one value. That's called the Composite Model. The other just looks at those carbon and climate values. That's your carbon and climate model. And then if you care just about biodiversity and you want to look at the 3 values, again, all of this is labeled here. You want to look at species richness, ecological connectivity, and ecological integrity. This is the model for you. So with that are kind of the background layers. We're going to jump into the actual atlas and show you how you can use this tool. So this is the Climate Atlas. One of the great things is that it's fast, it's quick. You don't have a lot of spinning when you use the tool. I'm going to walk you through just some of the jurisdictions here so you get a sense of the availability of kind of static layers. So right now I have federal lands toggled. This is federal lands. I'm focused on the West, but everything is labeled. So whether it's BLM, Forest Service, National Park, everything is labeled with the manager name and the unit name. You can also click protected lands. This is all based on US GIS data. Right now, we know it's not the best at calculating protected, resilient lands for conservation, but it is the tool we have. So again, everything is going to be labeled with, so here you have, this is a National Park Service unit, and it's labeled, it's a gap level 2. Congressional districts, which is something we added after doing a series of briefings with congressional allies. I think this really helps advocates get a sense of who do I need to go talk to, or if I am in Congress, what are the public lands and the public lands opportunities in my district? This obviously will change as the state redistricts lines. New protected lands, I'm actually going to turn some of this down so you can see. The new protected lands are our best way of calculating the Biden administration's progress toward achieving 30 by 30. So you can see here that the only things in this red are Bears Ears and Grand Staircase. Those are the additions to protected lands that we've seen throughout the last year. And then lastly, tribal lands. And again, we wanted to make sure we can see our tribal neighbors, but we also recognize that all lands in the US are indigenous. And then we have a link to this native land, which you can see historical indigenous ranges in the West and the United States. So that's just a sense of jurisdictions. We also have a series of what we're calling important management areas. These are all added because of briefings, some with the Friends Grassroots Network, some with BLM, but US inventoried roadless areas. These are all your Forest Service areas that have wilderness values. all roadless areas in the US. This is just giving you a sense of kind of intactness, and you see here that a lot of yellow. It'll make more sense when you kind of zoom in and are looking at a specific landscape. BLM ACECs, we know BLM ACECs are really important a lot of times for cultural values or resources. Again, everything is going to be labeled, so if you want to find more information about the specific ACEC, you can. We also added sage grouse. This was a recommendation from our friends at BLM because we know sage grouse priority areas in range. Sage grouse is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the West and for development in oil and gas. So we want to know if BLM land, Forest Service land overlaps with sage grouse habitat or priority habitat. It's just another way for us to be advocates about unprotected lands. And then another feature here is BLM lands with wilderness characteristics. And you can see that here. I know a lot of folks on this call work on inventory and inventorying for lands with wilderness characteristics. As you inventory lands and you come up with new sets of data and information, please send them my way. We want to make sure this map is as up to date as possible. One other addition to important management areas that we're working on is migratory habitat corridors. I'm working with the BLM right now to get data layers to add that to kind of our static overlay important management areas. And then lastly, kind of the last static layer we have here is our existing impacts, and we focus on oil and gas wells and oil and gas fields. When you zoom in, the oil and gas wells will kind of increase. So these dots are kind of representing 10 to 20 wells at a time. So that's kind of your basic context layers. Now let's get into some of the data that I described before. So we're going to start here with our composite model. And again, our composite model is adding up all of these 6 indicators here into one single value. So I'm going to turn that on and turn up my opacity. You can kind of play around with these functions to kind of do overlays of different management areas, unprotected BLM land, et cetera. So what this is telling me and what all of these models and indicators tell me is they are comparing to other terrestrial landscapes. So you can see here, there's always going to be a key on this side, and then blue being higher, red being lower, blue meaning that this ranks higher than other terrestrial landscapes for all 6 of these factors. There's also the carbon and climate model, and then there is the biodiversity model. And again, these change based on the factors that are being considered. And so now we can even look at any single one of these individual factors. Climate resilience, everything is labeled also. Climate resilience is the ability of species to adapt, meaning this is a relatively stable climate compared to others, which may increase in temperature more than others. Climate stability, similarity in ecosystems over time. Total carbon, this is a above ground, below ground, and soil carbon sequestration. So again, this is higher is the orange, lower is the purple, and it's just ranking between other ecosystems. Ecological connectivity is the ability of species, genes, to disperse, to migrate, and to flow between habitats. So yellow being the ability and dark being more restricted in their ability to move. Ecological intactness, this is one of my favorite data layers. If you can have a favorite data layer, this is just showing naturalness. Is this piece of ecosystem in a natural state, or is it developed for any reason? And then lastly, we have imperiled species richness. And one interesting thing about the Climate Atlas is although it focuses mostly on public lands, these data layers are coast to coast. So it's the most comprehensive set of scientific information that we have. And if you care about conservation in the East, you can still use this tool to discern different types of information about how we can advance 30 by 30 and climate mitigation and biodiversity protection in the East. So with that, I'm going to show you one last feature of the Atlas, and then we're going to jump into a couple of landscapes. We're going to start in New Mexico, and then we are going to jump up to Colorado, and then Nevada, and lastly, we're going to head to Alaska. So here we have what we're calling conservation opportunities, and this is what we are really excited about this tool, is that we think advancing conservation in the United States cannot be done without BLM and Forest Service lands. This is our greatest opportunity to advance 30 by 30, mitigate climate change, and protect biodiversity. So we're calling this your conservation opportunity. And so here you see all the unprotected BLM and Forest Service lands in the West. You can also use this tool up here to determine the top 20% of the unprotected lands based on this composite model. I can click that on, and it's going to tell me that that's about 70 million acres and 6.88 gigatons of carbon stored in the above ground, the below ground, and the soil resources. So just another tool you can use. So what I'm going to do now is kind of take everything that I showed you and put it into a couple of case studies and landscapes that hopefully some of you are familiar with or working on. So we're going to start with one that is a standard case study of ours, and it is also in our front website. And so if you want to go back and kind of look through what I'm walking through now, it will be on that website, theclimateatlas.org. So here we have a region that we are calling Caja del Rio. And so just what I'm seeing right now is I have toggled on Forest Service lands and unprotected BLM lands. Our Forest Service lands are going to be this dark green, and our unprotected BLM lands are going to be the tan. I can also go to important management areas, and there are some inventoried roadless areas here, and there's also BLM ACECs here. So again, I'm just getting a sense of what this landscape entails. I can also determine that Bandelier National Monument is from a connectivity standpoint, borders this area, and that also there are some tribal lands, the Pueblo de Cochiti, bordering this landscape too, so we know our tribal neighbors. And then lastly, if I want to know who I need to go talk to, I can turn on congressional districts, and it tells me that this is Congressional District 3. And again, so I'm just getting a sense of what is happening in this area. ACECs, I can go look up the ACEC. I know who to talk to about the importance of this area and some of our tribal neighbors. So now I'm going to turn off these layers, and we're actually going to look at the science and what the data tells us about these areas. Oops, let me turn off the ACECs real quick. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my composite model. So here we see that it's relatively high in this Caja del Rio area. And again, blue being higher, red being lower, and that just telling us that it resonates higher than other terrestrial landscapes. That means that all of these 6 factors added up is higher than other terrestrial landscapes. I can look at any single factor. Say I want to look at ecological intactness. Again, this is my favorite layer. And I see that Santa Fe being to the east of Caja del Rio, very heavily developed, but right outside of Santa Fe, even here we have the Santa Fe Airport. This is a relatively undeveloped area. The resolution is great. I can zoom in and see these are either trails or dirt roads. We have some impacts in here, everything kind of being labeled with our plateaus and hills. And so I can get a sense of, okay, relatively intact. I can also look at ecological connectivity, and that is really high in this region. We're just seeing that. I know elk are here, I know deer, I know there are other species here, and we can see that this is a great place for species dispersal, movement, and also great connectivity here between Bandelier, again, which is right here, and our Caja del Rio region. And then lastly, another factor is climate resilience. And so again, I'm seeing this is relatively high. This is ability of species to adapt to climate change. And so again, just showing us relatively, or showing us factors to tell us about the climate resilience of an area, and also why when we added up these 6 factors here, it equaled a high composite model. I know this is really fast going through all these, but I want to make sure I kind of show you all the ins and outs of the tool itself. I'm going to show you one more interesting way to use this tool. There's several parcels in this Caja del Rio region, and we've talked about the ability to see high carbon sequestration and low carbon sequestration. You can also use this tool to add up by using kind of shift click, and I can add up these individual parcels. Ooh. There we go. And it's going to tell me how many acres I'm adding up, and then also how much megatons of carbon is stored, again, in the above ground, the below ground, and soil resources. And so we know this is a high desert region, but that doesn't mean that there isn't sequestration taking place in this region. We kind of wanted to use this tool to show you that there's no bad acre. It also shows how many acres are in these kind of top 20, top 10, and top 5% of these various indices. This is really getting into the weeds, but again, it's showing you that there are 43,000 acres in this parcel of land that resonates as the top 20% of all unprotected BLM and Forest Service lands. That's a great thing that you can talk about. So this is just one example of how you can use the Climate Atlas, and I'm going to jump over to an area that is on the radar for conservation in Colorado, and it has a couple of different elements to it. So I'm going to show you this, what we're calling the greater Dinosaur region. And if you are a rafter or love rivers, you've been on the Yampa River, the Gates of Lador, the Green River. This is the confluence of those in Dinosaur National Monument, and just a really beautiful area in northern Colorado. So what we see in this area that's significant is we have protected areas here, Dinosaur National Monument. This is all unprotected BLM land. Again, this tan area is unprotected BLM land. And I can also see, if I look at existing impacts, that there are oil and gas wells in this region. And unfortunately, a lot of this greater Dinosaur region here is an oil and gas field. There's been a lot of controversy throughout the past years over oil and gas expansion into this field here. And the reason why is, if we turn on our important management areas, we also see that this is sage-grouse range, and also sage-grouse priority habitat. And using our scientific layers and going back to kind of our oil and gas wells, we can see that, again, as you zoom in, the oil and gas wells will increase. So it looks like one well will turn into kind of 20 wells. If I turn down this layer of unprotected BLM lands, we kind of know that they exist there, and just look at the oil and gas wells. And I turn on my ecological connectivity model. Again, this is telling us the ability of species to move, to disperse, to migrate in between landscapes. And I turn that up. What I see is oil and gas development severely impacts the ability of species to move and migrate in this area. Again, I can turn up and down my opacity, and you can see here are oil and gas wells. And then if I look at my key here, that the ability to move in this area is greatly diminished by what's happening in the development of this area, which is really dark and low, with yellow actually being higher and being able to move throughout this area. So these kind of factors allow us to make the case that there's sage-grouse here. Sage-grouse is our canary in the coal mine species. We need to protect it. And the more we develop for oil and gas, the more we limit the ability of species to move, to migrate, to disperse, to procreate. So that's kind of a good tool that we can use, the Climate Atlas, and a good way to be an advocate and just kind of tell the story about this landscape. We're going to jump over now to Nevada. Where are we? Okay. And one of the landscapes that you may have heard of recently that's been in the news as maybe a future national monument is an area we're calling Aviquame. And Aviquame is located in this kind of southern portion of Nevada. And I'm going to turn this down a little bit. That was our protected lands. It's kind of this southern portion right here. So first I'm going to start with unprotected. Oops. BLM and Forest Service areas. And you're going to see here's your unprotected BLM lands in this area. And then I will turn on protected lands so you can see from a connectivity standpoint that there are some wilderness areas within this proposal. And then also connectivity, it is borders Lake Mead National Recreation Area, Mojave Wilderness, and Castle Mountains over here to the southwest. So connectivity, these BLM lands would kind of be the interconnective tissue between some already protected areas. I can also see that from a cultural standpoint, this area has been surveyed and there are several ACECs here. And again, it shows me the name of the ACECs so I can go and look up more information about why this ACEC was originally protected and the purpose of protecting that ACEC. Sorry, I clicked in on that. And then lastly, I can turn off all of these factors, knowing that this is kind of my area, and I can look at the composite model. And again, we see here that it ranges from mid to high, higher than other terrestrial landscapes. And you can really see and distinguish, here's the town of Searchlight. These look like they are highways and or power lines. I'm not sure. Our ecological intactness, there we go, model will probably show. So yes, we have some roads and power lines here, but otherwise this area is relatively intact. So again, just more ways that you can use the climate atlas to tell a story about a landscape. I'm going to jump up to Alaska and then we're going to stop for questions and discussion. So one great factor about this map is we were able to gain funding from the Campion Foundation to add Alaska into this map and also Forest Service lands. I think a lot of times we leave off Alaska because it's too big, the data is different, it's too hard. And so we were able to include Alaska. We know that Alaska is really important when we talk about protecting public lands. And some of the issues up there with the conflict of oil and gas development, tribal communities, and conservation. I'm going to focus on one area, which is an area we call the Western Arctic. So if I turn on my unprotected lands, the Western Arctic is this kind of huge 22 million acre area right here. And it is an area that's really important to the Conservation Lands Foundation. One thing that I think you might find surprising is when we turn on the composite model, we see that it doesn't really resonate high in this area. This is the Checkbook Lake area. There have been stories in the media recently about oil and gas development kind of inching up into this really important area. We want to protect it. The climate atlas right now is showing us that it is relatively low to mid on the composite model, but I want to dig into the data layers to kind of show a different story about this area and why it should be protected. First, if we look at total carbon in this area, it's really high. This is all tundra. We know tundra stores a lot of carbon. So again, really high in this area for carbon sequestration. If we look at ecological intactness, I mean, really there is nothing happening up here. There's a little town right here. This is the native village of Nuiqsut. You zoom in right here, I think there's a couple hundred people in the native village of Nuiqsut. And then over here, this is Prudhoe Bay, and this is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So if we turn on our oil and gas wells and fields, we see that there's our oil and gas fields and our oil and gas wells, the native village of Nuiqsut, and this again is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. But as far as the area that we're looking to protect, which is this area over here, it's intact. So we know it's high carbon, it's intact. If we look at species richness, again, it's really high. We know this area is really important for migratory bird habitat and caribou nesting ground. So really high there. So we would wonder why then, if we have such strong indicators, that our model data would be low. And that is because the climate is not stable here. We know that the tundra, the Arctic is feeling the impacts of climate change faster than we are in the lower 48. And so we're seeing that they're starting to face melting climates, and the tundra is melting up in this region. Climate stability is low. That is impacting the composite model. So this really low indicator is pulling down the composite model. That doesn't mean that this is a bad landscape. We are using these different data layers to tell a story about why this landscape is really important. So those are just some of the ways you can use the climate atlas. I will say before we turn it over to questions that, you know, the climate atlas might not resonate for every landscape. I hope it tells a story about values of landscape, whether it resonates high on certain models or not. Maybe it's intact, but there's a lot of other factors that you can, that tell the story of the importance of landscapes, whether it's cultural, historical values, whether it's quality of life, whether it's recreation. I mean, there's so many other important values for the protection of public lands. We just know that in this environment, in this administration, that carbon, climate, biodiversity, those are the factors, that are going to be really important for this administration and for advocates. So with that, I am going to stop and turn it over maybe to Andres or others to ask questions. And I can jump back into the atlas if there's a certain place that people want to zoom in on or have questions about.
Awesome. First off, Danielle, thank you so much for this walkthrough. We'll get to all these questions and answers in just a little bit. I would urge everybody after this webinar, if you haven't already, just get on the website, push all the buttons, explore everything. You're not going to break it, but you're going to learn a lot. I think Danielle hit on a really important point at the very end there with the Western Arctic. Is this is a tool to help us tell a story, but you're not going to use the same metrics to tell the same story. You're going to use the metrics that matter. And I think being able to parse out what data points matter in the story that you're trying to tell makes the most compelling case. So really push all the buttons, move the opacity, learn how to look through the different layers and overlay them. And the ability of this tool to tell an important story is massive. Let's see, I had one question that came through in the chat box that I wanted to get to first from Susan Kearns. Does protected lands identify wilderness or other non-wilderness protections? What's that definition look like?
Yeah, so protected lands are defined by USGS, and they do include wilderness and wilderness study areas as protected. They do not include ACECs or other administrative protections. They also include all your national parks, your national monuments, and your national conservation areas.
Thanks. And related to that, Donna Stevens had a question. Are you defining non-protected BLM Forest Service lands as non-wilderness?
Yeah, so anything that is not in that category of protected is determined to be unprotected. So yes, that would be anything outside of your national monuments, national conservation areas, wilderness or wilderness study areas would be in your non-protected classes. Even ACECs, again, are considered not protected.
And Bridget just asked the question that went with that ACEC is area of critical environmental concern. We use a lot of lingo. And maybe this connects with Craig Swanson's question. I may have missed it, but is there a FAQ or user guide for this tool? And does it include acronym definitions?
That is a good question. It should include acronym definitions, and maybe that's something that we can add. There is a user guide on that website, again, the climateatlas.org, and it goes through kind of basic steps to use this atlas. And so all of the different areas you can click on, all the models and indicators, what they mean. There's also a methodology section where you can go and learn more about the different layers themselves. If you are a science wonky person and you want to dig into where this information came from, there's a link to the technical report from Conservation Science Partners. Everything is cited, peer reviewed, and you can dig into all of that information.
And then we had two similar questions from Helen and Allison. How does this map, this interactive map, compare to the resilient and connected landscape work done by the Nature Conservancy?
Yeah, so I've looked a little bit at the Nature Conservancy's map. I think the one thing that is different about this map is more about not the science itself or what the science tells you, but about the actual tool itself. This was created with partners to talk about 30 by 30 in biodiversity, not from an individual like Conservation Lands Foundation standpoint, but from a coalition standpoint. Also, we've added a lot of tools and bells and whistles based on feedback from outside organizations and parties. So a lot of what you see here today was not from, just CLF. It was really driven by 6 months of doing dozens of tutorials with our environmental allies. That's where we got the lands with the wilderness characteristics data layer, from congressional allies to BLM allies, where we continue to add bells and whistles to make this a tool that people will use and they find useful.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize that second point you made there, Danielle, is that the idea here is this is all information that is mostly publicly available, but hard to find and really hard to compile. And our goal with this really is taking all of the tools, and Danielle, you did such a good job with this, of taking these tools and putting them together for the public in an easy to use format, which I think is monumental work, because otherwise this is months and months of work to talk about one landscape, where now we have it on one map that's free and available to the public. And that, I think that's huge. Ellison had another question. Are there underlying models and indicators available to download as GIS data?
Yeah, so my understanding, and again, I am not a GIS tech person, but that all of this information is open source. So I would contact Conservation Science Partners, and they're linked here, and you can actually download this information, this data, and if you have the technological resources in-house to take it and then add your own stuff in layers, that you can do that. We really wanted this to be, that's another thing that we run into a lot of times with these type of tools, is that they're proprietary or the people won't share them. And that's the opposite of we want people to use this information. So I can connect you with Conservation Science Partners. And again, all of this, is Andre said, they didn't create new science. This was taking the best available science and putting into a tool.
And I think related to that comment you made for folks on this call, if there's ways that you're thinking about incorporating this into your work, whether I see some of my colleagues from Western Colorado University, or folks in the network or other conservation groups, and you're working through how to best use this, reach out to myself and Danielle. We would love to work with you to, if it's another tutorial for staff, or if it's really thinking strategically of what is the story that's being told in your landscape, what layers tell the best case. We really want to dive into that sort of stuff, because that's why we all created this tool. I got 2 questions here. I'm going to answer one and then the other. From someone at Friends of the Inyo. Could you show how to share a map or download one as a PDF for use offline? Realizing that often we're in the middle of the field on a field visit with some staffers, and we just want to whip out a piece of paper where we don't have internet access.
Yeah, so right now we don't have a download function. If you're a Mac user, my best thing is I use Shift Command 4, and you can take an image of anything you're looking at. So I don't know what that equates to in Microsoft, but using that tool, you can take images. What we did was using just, again, Command Shift 4, we're able to take images and put them into like a case study. So that's what we have right now as far as sharing. We also have functionality where if you go to the tool itself, there's a share this map button. Say I'm looking at it, I'm zoomed in on a landscape, I have my ACECs, my unprotected lands, and I have everything that I kind of want to show. I can click that share this map, and it's going to create a link in my clipboard that I can copy and paste and send to someone. They're going to see exactly what I was looking at. So it's an easy way. It's kind of like Google Directions, right? You create your Google Directions and then you send them to someone and they open and see exactly the directions that you wanted them to see. That's another option. We are continuing to think about what like phase 3 looks like for this tool, in addition to adding those migratory habitat layers. We are thinking of somehow adding the ability for you to upload your own boundaries, perimeters, landscapes, so you can kind of run your own analysis. And the other is figuring out some way to do some sort of PDF download or some way to kind of create a map. These are all things that are kind of, we're thinking about as next steps.
And then Linda Castro is speaking you and David Feynman's love language here. Will you update in January with California's new House districts along with all the other districting?
Yes, we know that everything is being redistricted, and we were like, should we hold off and not add those layers? And I said, well, let's just add them for now. And then it's an easy thing to change. That's a static data layer. So as soon as we get kind of a new data layer for certain states, we can just upload that. Yeah.
Awesome. And Donna Stevens had a comment, but I think it's spot on. This is a very useful tool, even for those of us who aren't GIS folks. And I think that's the entire intent.
Yes, I am not a GIS folks. So yes, I get that. Thank you, Donna.
Well, if y'all have any other questions, feel free to type them in that question and answer box and we'll get to them all. Otherwise, yeah. Well, y'all are thinking of any final questions or comments or kudos for Danielle and team. Just wanted to thank you all for spending the afternoon with us as we close out this year that's been difficult to say the least, but also inspiring with a new administration and a lot more hope. We really wanted to end our grassroots advancement program materials and offerings with a little bit of hope and a tool that you all can use to keep doing the good work that we all get to do. It's not easy work, it's hard work, but tools like this and the support of our network makes it work that we're going to continue to be engaged in. So from all of us at CLF, thank you so much. Oh, and let's see, I think Friends of the Inyo had one last comment here.
Yeah, I know.
I just lost it.
Oh, Friends of the Inyo, it would be helpful to focus on creating maps for current campaigns, similar to what we started for the case studies. I agree. We are currently trying to get funding to do like 10 more case studies of priority landscapes based on everything that you all are working on. And so we're working on it. Know that we love all of these ideas. It's more of just like, how do we get the funding to continue to use this tool? And that is one thing we are actively seeking right now, so we can create more case studies like the ones that we have on the front end webpage. So hold that thought.
And a good way to get more funding is to show that this thing is working well. So really use it, talk about it. The next time you're meeting with folks, bring it up and walk people through it. The more people talk about it and start to use it, the more this will be legitimized as a go-to resource and tool for folks. I think right now it's very new. So as we start to explain it to folks, it'll likely be the first time they've seen anything like this. But our goal is that in short order, this is something that people bring up immediately in conversation, and we could skip the how to use this tool to just going straight to using the tool as the go-to tool for all these discussions.
Yeah, although I will say Nada Culver, who was acting director at BLM, is now deputy secretary, I forget her title. We showed her a tutorial of this and she said, am I going to start to see all these climate atlas maps come across my desk? And I said, probably, you are.
All right. Could you quantitate damage from ORVs on environment, including soundscape, killing vegetation, et cetera? Is this a OHV related tool or?
You could see damage from OHV or illegal roads if you use that naturalness tool. You can zoom in and really see what is happening on the ground. And so if there is no road there, no transmission line, no power line on the like actual BLM map, and you're seeing damage, you can use that ecological intactness natural state tool and zoom in and you can see damage on the ground. So yes, I mean, if you know this is happening and you zoom in on a certain area, you could see that with the resolution of this tool. Yes, unfortunately.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful winter break. We look forward to seeing you all in the new year. If you have any questions at all, I'll be sending a follow-up with our contact info, and reach out and ask us questions. We'd love to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.